Welcome everybody. Bienvenidos a todos. I will repeat this message in English. Hola, mi nombre es Andrea. Estoy aquí con la Community Language Cooperative para ayudarnos a practicar la justicia del lenguaje, donde podamos hablar y escuchar en el idioma de nuestro corazón o el idioma en el que hablamos con nuestras familias en nuestras casas, donde ningún idioma tiene más dominancia que el otro. Para esto vamos a utilizar la interpretación simultánea en inglés y en español. Cuando aprendamos la interpretación, tú vas a ver un mapa mundo en la parte inferior de tu pantalla, o si estás en tu teléfono o en tu tableta, vas a ver 3 punticos o donde dice More o Más, y ahí vas a poder seleccionar tu idioma. Si eres totalmente bilingüe en inglés y en español, no tienes que seleccionar ningún idioma. Pero si no, tienes que seleccionar uno para que puedas entender a todo el mundo. Te pido que hables a un paso conversacional, que cuando estés hablando te acerques al micrófono y que cuando no estés hablando te mantengas en silencio. Si tienes alguna pregunta, siempre puedes hacerla en el chat. Cuando estés hablando, si estás hablando muy rápido, voy a hacer esta señal que significa que estires tus palabras para yo poder interpretar todo lo que estás diciendo. Y si estás hablando muy bajito, voy a hacerte así para que hables más duro. Hi everybody, my name is Andrea. I'm here with the Community Language Cooperative to help us practice language justice in a space where we can speak and hear in the language of our heart or the language that we speak at home with our families. Today we're going to have simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish, and once we turn on the interpretation, you're going to see a world map on the bottom of your screen or 3 little dots or where it says more, and you're going to be able to select your language. If you are in a Chromebook, the language interpretation doesn't work, so you will need to jump on a phone. Se me olvidó decirle que si estás en una Chromebook no vas a poder utilizar esta función, así que te va a tocar meterte desde tu teléfono. I do ask that when you're speaking, you stretch your words, you speak at a conversational pace so that I can interpret everything correctly, that you speak close to your microphone, and that when you're not speaking, you mute yourself so that there is no any background noise. If you have any questions, you can always ask it in the chat. After we turn on the interpretation, we're going to double check that everybody has been able to select the language. Después de que aprendamos la interpretación, vamos a mirar que todo el mundo haya podido seleccionar un lenguaje. Jesse, we can begin interpretation now and then give me a couple of seconds to double check that everybody can hear.
Does anybody have a question about the language selection? Anyone who has selected English?
Thank you, Andrea. Bienvenidos, bienvenido. Welcome to the webinar, Strategies to Protect Academic Freedom, organized by CAFA, Coalition for Academic Freedom in the Americas, or CLAA, Coalición por la Libertad Académica en las Américas, an initiative led by the University of Ottawa's Human Rights Research and Education Center, la Universidad de Monterrey, and Scholars at Risk. The main purpose of this coalition is to move forward the discourse around academic freedom by generating clear and regionally tailored guidelines, foster direct advocacy, and position the Americas as global leaders on the development of relevant human rights norms and strategies to defend academic freedom. I am Catalina Arango. I'm a social researcher, social communicator, originally from Colombia, and one of the project coordinators of this coalition. So we are very happy to have you here. This webinar will be divided into 2 segments. And the first, we will discuss country reports and legal tools. And in the second part, led by my colleague Rafael, we will discuss the process of building this coalition to respond to attacks and strengthen a culture of academic freedom in the region. We are delighted, extremely happy to have an amazing panel of experts who will share with us all their expertise and share with us the information of the state of academic freedom in Mexico, Brazil, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. These are just examples of relevant cases in the region. We are aware of the problems, the tendencies, and the movements that have been occurring in the region in the recent years. So the idea is to not only talk about these countries, but to include cases and advocacy efforts from all countries in the American region, from Canada to Argentina. So the format of this part is that each speaker, after my presentation, will have 7 minutes to make their own presentation. And after that, we will have a space for questions that you can either do raising your hand so we can hear your voice and see your face, or you can do using the chat by writing. So welcome I extend you a big welcome to this first part of the webinar. And first, we will start with Catherine Andrews. She comes from Mexico. She obtained her PhD in Mexican history at the University of St. Andrews, Scotland in 2001. Her principal lines of research are in Mexican constitutional history and the history of feminist thought. Her most recent book is De Cádiz a Querétaro, Historiografía y Bibliografía del Constitucionalismo Mexicano, published by CIDE, Fondo de Cultura Económica, in 2017. She is professor in the History Division of the Centro de Investigación y Docencia Económicas, CIDE, in Mexico City. So, Kath, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you, Catalina. Thank you to the University of Ottawa for the invitation. Well, I've prepared a few words to say, just to give you an idea of what's been happening in Mexico since Andrés Manuel López Obrador was elected as president. And what I'd like to say really is that what's happened, Andrés López Obrador has a project to transform Mexico called the Fourth Transformation. This transformation is imagined as a response to the democratic transition of the 1980s and the 1990s, which he interprets as a period of neoliberalism in which the ideals brought about by the revolution were turned on their head, perverted and spoiled. That's to say, he has an interpretation that goes against perhaps a liberal interpretation of what happened in the 80s and 90s, which was the gradual liberation of Mexico from the domination of the Partido de Revolución Institucional, the institutionalized revolutionary party that had governed Mexico as a monopoly for various decades previously. And as part of this transformation, López Obrador thinks that academics were the principal architects and the principal beneficiaries of the neoliberal reforms that were enacted. And he seems to see us in academia as people who live a life of undeserved privileges and high financial rewards, and that we make little contribution to the public good. Plus, he's also a politician who doesn't really like criticism, and he rejects outright academic research which doesn't support his policy or his political statements. And really, from his point of view, no criticism is valid. All criticism comes from privileged minorities who are just defending their own selfish interests. And so he wants to, part of the fourth transformation in this case is then to transform education to serve the fourth revolution, the fourth reformation, I mean. And so he thinks that academic institutions need to be reformed to root out privilege and force them to work for the public good. We need to change our teaching priorities and our research priorities, make sure that our research benefits the government. And above all, we should refrain from criticizing him in public and in private. This is evidence, for example, as in the bill for a new science and technology law, which governs that aspect of academic life in Mexico, which proposes that the government should establish a state agenda for research and to impose this state agenda on its institutionalized research institutes like the Center for Teaching and Investigation in Economics, CDE, which is where I work. Similarly, this law establishes that all fellowships, all scholarships, all research grants, all postgraduate study, and probably all in undergraduate study should be reorganized around the research agenda, the state research agenda, and are called the 10 national problems. In order to receive funding, you will have to show that you are contributing to the research around these national problems. I'm using the future tense and the present tense because the law has not been brought into effect yet. However, the body that, excuse me, pardon. Where was I? I'm really sorry. I'm sorry, it won't work. I've forgotten where I was. Yes, and so the government is trying to use money to enforce its research priorities, which is fine up to a point. However, the fact is that this isn't the only thing that it's doing. It also has a policy of direct intervention into public institutions. And I'm going to use the example of where I work, CLAA, as an example. And this was, we had a recent election, election procedure to nominate a new director. And in contrary to all our procedures, a new director was imposed upon us against our will and in front of our protests. And to justify this attack, the supporters of CONACYT and the president, CONACYT is the body which governs who proposed the law that I talked about and governs higher education in Mexico. It's the National Council for Science and Technology, And the president denounced the CDE as an institution of self-interested academics, as I said, whose research and teaching only serves private interests. And they hope that the new director will force the professors and the students to abandon our neoliberal practices and make our research and teaching more palatable to López Obrador and his political party. And as the director admitted to me before he sacked me, part of this plan is to create a hostile environment to lead to the departure of most of the current academic staff. So we've got, on the one hand, the use of resources to try and push a certain research agenda and starve other research agendas of funding, but more worryingly, we have a policy of direct interference in the appointment of leadership positions within public institutions, such as my own, in order to force those institutions like my own that is characterized by the high quality of its research and thus has been highly critical of his government to take a step back, to stop criticizing his government. And part of the plan is, of course, that we start to produce research and produce research which will support his policies, and teach students to support him. No? Another example perhaps we can see, and I think this is really very concerning angle, even more concerning than what's happened in my institution, would be the way that the state uses its apparatus to persecute individual academics. And an example would be the relationship that exists between the Director General of CONACYT and our current Attorney General, Alejandro Gertz Manero. Now, Gertz Manero is the rector of a private university here in Mexico City, and as such wanted for many years to be part of the national system of researchers, which is a prestigious program run by CONACYT, to which I belong and many of my colleagues belong. And in order to belong to it, you have to pass a review process every 3 or 4 years by a committee of your peers. Gertz Manero was unable to do this despite repeated attempts, and was refused by this committee. And this committee also pointed out that he had committed plagiarism in various of his works. However, once he was made Attorney General, and once Andrés Manuel López Obrador was made president, which happened at the same time, suddenly Gertz Manero was allowed to enter the national system of researchers. In fact, an ad hoc committee was made up, and it adjudged that he should be given the highest level within this system. And when academics, we protested against his plagiarism, the ethics committee reduced number of the ethics committee within CONACYT decided that they could not receive the protest, the complaint about his plagiarism, because the complainants were not the authors of the text plagiarized. And I must point out that the authors of the text plagiarized have been dead for many decades. I tell you this because last year in August 2020, Gertz Manero, his office, issued an arrest warrant for 31 academics, 4 of which belong to my institution. These 31 academics had worked within the previous regime of CONACYT and were accused of organized crime. Had the arrest warrants been fulfilled, they would have been sent, these academics would have been sent to the most high security prison in Mexico State. They were accused of organized crime embezzlement because of actions taken while working in CONACYT. It's a very long story, but I'll just say that they were all part of an administrative procedure which transferred money from CONACYT to a body which was part of CONACYT and was regulated by the law that's still in effect, the science and technology law, to conduct, it's called the Foro de Ciencia y Tecnología, which was an advisory body. The people who participated in the administrative action of this transfer of money that is the basis for the accusation of organized crime. They've been lucky up to this point in
Kath, I'm sorry.
My time is running out, isn't it? Yes, and so that I would just like to conclude. I'm sorry, I was distracted by the comments and the interruption. I'm really sorry that that's happened. So to conclude, Andrés Manuel López Obrador has a hostile attitude to academics. He thinks academics and research should be at his service. If it's not at his service, they should be silenced one way or another. And on the other side, we have very worrying developments within the use of the state apparatus to take this one step further and use it against individual academics. I'm very sorry for all the interruptions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kath. We have a comment here in the chat. I ask, please, this person to just wait a little bit for the experts to finish their presentation, and then we will have a space for you to explain your situation and try to find a solution. So we are now, after talking and discussing this situation in Mexico, we have Joao Veloso from the University of Ottawa, my colleague and great professor. He is an associate professor at the Faculty of Law of the University of Ottawa. He is originally from Brazil and participates in research and networks there. So Professor Veloso works on topics related to sentencing, access to justice, penalization of protesters and immigrants, and drug policy. He is a board member of the Canadian Law and Society Association and of the Research Committee on Sociology of Law of the International Sociology Association, where he is also chair of the working group Utilization of Social Problems. So Joao, welcome and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you everybody for being here. Well, I'll try to save some time during my presentation to have a little bit of more time for the questions. So the situation in Brazil, probably you know a bit since Bolsonaro raised into power. He already raised into power in a context of attacks and threats to academics. Something that was reported, like for instance, during the elections, was crackdowns in universities and this kind of discourse of schools without parties and how universities were ideological place and they should be shut down. And this is something that's important to note, like even if it dates back to up to 2018 because, well, it's election in Brazil in 22, and one of the issues that people are wondering there is how elections is going to occur. You know, universities are a space of freedom with events from all political realm. You know, Bolsonaro went to university as other candidates went to university to give talks and this kind of thing. So people are really don't know how they're going to cope with the elections this year, and it's something that is still not well solved. But like going back to the record in the government moving quite quickly, well, there's a couple of one of the big things was cuts in budgets, and you know I'll break down to three effects into that. Another point still related to cuts was appointments of senior administrators, and the third one, which is also related, completely related to academic freedom, is the lack of trust in science and scientific bodies of public agencies. So, like going to the cuts quite quickly, and you know, I hope we're not like providing a session of bad examples of how you should shut down science in the Americas, because like you know, lots of these policies are somehow complementary. Like I'll probably complement some things from the Brazilian case that was not that clear in the Mexican case, even it's probably happened as well. So, you know, cut basically the first point of that, well, it reduced academic and scientific budget. So it's not necessarily a smart thing to do from a societal and investment point of view. You know, where you are cutting from where you bring economic results quite quickly. But one of the two dimensions of cuts that was very sophisticated and during the Bolsonaro term was delaying, you know, they just reduced the budget, but they also delayed the release of the money they approved in Congress to the last periods of the fiscal year. And, you know, the logic of that was that in the following fiscal year, they would argue that, well, we gave money to the universities, but they didn't spend the money. So we're going to cut what they didn't spend. You know, so sometimes budgets were released by mid-December. and they had like 2-3 weeks to spend. So this is something that we should note as a kind of long-term strategy of dismantling. So not only reducing the cut, but like even when you approve certain budgets, and sometimes deputies, they fight for additional budgets, and they are released in these terms. And one thing you should know for the Brazilian university structure, most of the research-based universities are from the federal network. So professors, they are not, a professor of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro or something like that. They are employees of the Ministry of Education. So, they are public staff, public servants, direct to the ministry. So this kind of cuts the effect, like directly, their job security and so on. Second point on cuts is on funding agencies, because sometimes they would release a budget for funding agents. So they would set like the whole process, which is very complicated, as my colleague Kat Andrew mentioned. And by the end of the process, they select, peer selection. They select a couple of top candidates, and they would cut at that point, pretty much erasing the work of academics for the past 2 months or so. So the effects of that in the academic community is huge. So like turning back quite quickly on the senior appointment of senior administrators. So the government also already had the ability to appoint, to choose among a triple list of presidents of universities elected by the university community. The practice was to elect the first one, but while Bolsonaro didn't necessarily follow this step, he would clearly not select those who oppose to him to a certain extent. But most importantly, like the tricky part of new executive order that he passed, that he decreed, was to also appoint senior administrators. So even if he select like the wrong guy, for his perspective, he could also select, vice president research, vice president academic, vice president human resource. He could select the attorney general for the university, which is the guy controlling administrative procedures against professors. So people were pretty much freak out when they passed. He made this decree because, okay, it's not only affecting the president of the university, but they're trying to intervene in the actual bureaucracy of the administration to silence opposition. So this is a little bit on decrease intervention. And the last point on kind of anti-academic discourse, I think there's a couple of high-profile examples. For instance, on the Amazon fires, basically the spatial agency in Brazil was relying on satellite data, from NASA, and the government said, well, no, there's no fire. This data does not exist. This should not be, and even if it exists, should not be publicized because it's not in the government's interest. And the director of the agency was shut down. Tried to be arrested at some point, and he was basically one of the top 10 scientists of the year from the Nature's magazine, and not the only one that, experienced this kind of situation. So lots of governmental bodies that rely on scientific knowledge and evidence, they were systemically shut down. And I think this is a kind of a more invisible threat to academic freedom, because sometimes we don't see these folks as academics, but they're pretty much like university professors, taking their time off to contribute to society, and they got shut down as well. So just concluding, this was pretty much like a summary on the 3 points regarding the first one on intervention to universities. In the more electoral context, we're still figuring out what is going to happen the following months. And well, I'll keep you posted. Thank you.
Thank you, Joao. We have been seeing that these tendencies are common across the region. So cuts in budgets, interference in academic autonomy, seeing academics as enemies, and their research as well. So let's continue our program with Ricardo Villalobos Fontalvo. He's from Venezuela, a Venezuelan lawyer, a very close colleague for us. He holds a LLM in International Human Rights Law and Practice by the University of Essex and the UK. Ricardo is a board member and the coordinator of research and international advocacy department of the NGO Aula Abierta. In addition, he is a lecturer on human rights law and at University Rafael Urdaneta in Venezuela, and he's a researcher of the Human Rights Commission of the University of Zulia. He is author and co-author of several publications analyzing academic freedom within the International Human Rights Labor Framework. Ricardo, bienvenido. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Catalina, for introducing me. Good afternoon to all. Academic freedom is threatened through different practices in Venezuela. During my presentation, I will focus in three main concerns. First, Aula Abierta's view that the academic community must be recognized as a group in a specific situation of vulnerability in Venezuela. Secondly, the indoctrination practices in the country. And finally, I will address the affectations to the autonomy of the higher education institutions by the executive power and its impact in the quality of education and academic freedom. So first, let's discuss the attacks on the university community. In Aula Abierta, we have been promoting before human rights bodies that in a specific context, members of the academic community could be considered as individuals in a specific situation of vulnerability due to their role in the production of critical knowledge. To do so, we recently conducted research in which it was reviewed three historical periods of protests in Venezuela, 2014, 2017, and 2019. We were able to identify that students and university professors were victims of torture, arbitrary detentions, and other gross human rights violations. Moreover, we found that the number of students and professors attacked was pretty similar to the number of victims belonging to groups that have been already recognized as groups in condition of a specific vulnerability in context of limitations of the civic space, such as journalists. For instance, in 2017 protests, 388 journalists were reportedly victims of attack by the state. In the same period, Aula Abierta documented that at least 356 members of the university community were attacked in the protests by the state. In addition, we reviewed the 2020 and 21 UN fact-finding missions reports on the protests in Venezuela. Albeit the report did not aim to search specifically for victims linked to the university community, Aula Abierta was able to identify that an important number of the cases used as iconic cases in the mentioned reports referred to university students and professors. In the reports of 2020, 45% of the examples of extrajudicial executions refer to university students and professors, while the 53% of the examples of cruel and inhuman treatment refers to members of the academic community. In the 2021 report of the fact-finding mission, 50% of the examples referring to extrajudicial killings refer to victims, members of the academic community. Unfortunately, outside the context of protest, the state also targets the academic community in Venezuela. For instance, in 2020, the National Academy of Mathematical, Physics, and Natural Science was publicly threatened by the former president of the Constituent National Assembly because of its academic report criticizing the government's policies on COVID-19. More recently, Professor Javier Tarazona was detained because of his research and advocacy work denouncing the presence of the Colombian guerrilla in Venezuelan schools. The situation mentioned allows us to hold that in Venezuela, members of the academic community are a group in a specific situation of vulnerability. This thesis could be extrapolated to other countries, of course, being necessary to review each context on a case-by-case basis. But the second issue to be addressed today is the process of indoctrination in the higher education system. The state has implemented legislative, judiciary, and executive measures to impose socialism as the goal to be pursued by the education in Venezuela. The Plan de la Patria 2019-2025 is the current public policy established by the government that exposes socialism as the ideology that should be govern the exercise of public power. This public policy is binding for the Minister of the Higher Education and the other stakeholders of the higher education system. The main concern regarding the Plan de la Patria is the imposition of a single ideology of thought in the higher education system, as it first instructs the development of a model of universities education in accordance with the socialist productive model, and planning action and management for the construction of socialism. Secondly, it conditions research to a socialist vision, the construction of the socialist productive model, and the socialist ethics. The last issue to be addressed in my presentation is the attacks to the university autonomy in Venezuela. Regarding this point, the first pattern is the intervention in the self-governance of the autonomous universities by the National Council of Universities, which is headed by the Ministry of Higher Education. Aula Abierta has documented that from 2016 to 2021, 50% of the public autonomous universities have suffered attacks to their autonomy by the National Council. In 4 cases, the National Council has arbitrarily appointed vice chancellors and other university authorities. Similarly, in other cases, the National Council appointed monitoring commissions to challenge the appointment of authorities made by the governing bodies of the universities in the exercise of their autonomy, as it happened in 2021 to the National University Simón Bolívar. The second pattern is what we call budgetary asphyxia. Universities in Venezuela relied on the budget given by the state. Since 2007, the state has been decreasing the budget for the autonomous universities to the extent that, for example, for 2022, the Central University of Venezuela, the main public university in my country, is lacking the 98% of the budget needed to continue operating. This naturally impacts the right to quality of education and academic freedom. 3 concrete examples could be: the budget for each research project in the universities is less than $1. Libraries of the main universities have been inoperative for several years now. And finally, there is around 50% of students drop out in most of the autonomous universities. To conclude, academic freedom and academic community in Venezuela are under attack. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Muchas gracias. Finally, we have Finally, we have the region case of Nicaragua, the country case of Nicaragua. For this, we have, I will switch to Spanish because she will present in Spanish. Xochitl Hernández es miembro de la Unión Nacional de Catedráticos Mariano Fiallos Gil, un grupo emergente de profesores universitarios que abogan por la libertad y la justicia académica en Nicaragua. Trabajó durante 7 años en universidades públicas y privadas y actualmente trabaja en construcción de paz y acción no violenta con sociedad civil en América Latina. Tiene una licenciatura conjunta en Desarrollo Internacional y Antropología de la Universidad de Trent y una maestría en Educación de la Universidad de Cambridge y una certificación en maestra en Ciencias Sociales de la Universidad Autónoma de Nicaragua. Estará acompañada por Elton Rivera, un activista por los derechos humanos en materia estudiantil, libertad académica y autonomía universitaria en Nicaragua, estudiante de la licenciatura en Ciencias Políticas, víctima de expulsión universitaria de la carrera de medicina cuando cursaba el último año por mecanismo de represalia política ligada a su trabajo en defensa de derechos universitarios y actualmente está finalizando estudios de dicha carrera. Fungió como presidente del Movimiento Acción Universitaria durante el periodo 2021. Bienvenidos.
Muchísimas gracias, Catalina. ¿Me escuchan todos y todas? Voy a hablar en español. Y bueno, para mí voy a tratar de ser bien breve para poderle dar el mayor espacio a Elton, dado que la voz estudiantil es central en esta discusión de la libertad académica y la justicia académica, como lo estamos mencionando.
Sorgil, se está cortando un poco tu
El
comunicación.
caso de Nicaragua se ha vuelto en el 2018. ¿Me escuchan ahora?
Sí, un poco mejor, claro.
Ok, puede ser que sea por mi internet.
Okay.
El caso de Nicaragua es paradigmático desde las protestas del 2018 por ser estas lideradas por movimiento estudiantil, no solamente desde el sector estudiantil de escuelas privadas, de universidades privadas, sino de una amplia población de las universidades públicas en Nicaragua que estaban reconociendo que la represión estatal que se había dado a nivel social se estaba intensificando al interno de las mismas universidades públicas. Esto se ha visto reflejado no solamente en el cuerpo estudiantil, con tácticas, por ejemplo, en la utilización de becas, de calificaciones y de oportunidades de avance estudiantil en contrapartida de favores políticos, de obediencia partidaria a lo interno de las universidades públicas, sino también se vio reflejado en la represión en todos los niveles de la administración de las universidades públicas, incluyendo y sobre todo en la represión a docentes a través de la violación de sus derechos laborales en casos como, por ejemplo, el despido ilegal, el incumplimiento de la ley laboral que enmarca esos despidos, incluso hasta el robo de materiales de educación y de los mismos trabajos académicos que venían trabajando esos docentes dentro de las universidades. Agrego además a esto que también incluso los mismos administrativos de las universidades han estado recibiendo represión en el sentido de la demanda de obediencia a la hora de implementar represión a sus propios colegas. Y en este sentido, cabe destacar que la autonomía universitaria que tanto perdón, es que estoy en Bolivia y se me está yendo la voz. La autonomía universitaria que tanto esfuerzo y tantas movilizaciones y tantos mártires tuvieron en Nicaragua, se ve violada desde el sentido más básico. Las clases y la libertad de cátedra que se había peleado por tanto y que se había logrado un poco abrir durante la década de los 2000, se ha venido perdiendo en el sentido de que ahora los mismos docentes que se han mantenido, que no han sido despedidos, tienen que pasar por revisiones internas desde la misma facultad, desde las mismas facultades, de tal manera de que su trabajo no contradiga la línea partidaria y la línea ideológica del gobierno de turno. En este sentido, voy a terminar aquí. Solo quiero mencionar que vemos muchísimos paralelismos con el caso explicado por nuestro colega Ricardo, en el cual la imposición ideológica que va tan en contra de la libertad científica y académica que deberían representar nuestras universidades es clara. Paso entonces a mi colega Elton, cuya voz creo que sería la más importante acá.
Muchas gracias, Xochitl. Yo también hablaré en español. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación. Todas las voces que estamos por acá, que han compartido, me han precedido en la palabra, han mencionado cosas fundamentales y factores con los que nos identificamos muchísimo. Como decía Ricardo, lo mismo que él mencionaba también pasa igual en Nicaragua. Tendrá mucho que ver que los regímenes que están en el gobierno de nuestros países actúan de forma similar. pero los centros educativos nicaragüenses se han vuelto más en espacios de adoctrinamiento partidario de una ideología específica más que en academia, más que en centros de formación y ciencia. Dentro de las afectaciones que han habido en Nicaragua, que han sido muchísimas en materia estudiantil, quisiera mencionar algunas cifras importantes para que podamos tener una magnitud de lo que realmente ha causado los ataques a la autonomía universitaria y a la libertad académica por parte del Estado nicaragüense. Del 2018 a la fecha, hay más de 150 estudiantes universitarios expulsados de las universidades por el simple hecho de no comulgar o de no respaldar la política autoritaria del gobierno de Nicaragua. Aparte de eso, tenemos más de 47 estudiantes a la fecha de hoy que han sido asesinados por fuerzas oficiales y paraestatales del gobierno nicaragüense. Tenemos más de 37 estudiantes que han padecido de prisión. Actualmente tenemos 7 de ellos que se encuentran en estado de condenas por asuntos políticos, es decir, tenemos 7 presos políticos actualmente que son estudiantes, todos jóvenes, dentro de ellos una joven de apenas 22 años que cumplió años casualmente estando en prisión. Y de esta manera se han venido intensificando la represión del 2018 hasta la fecha en Nicaragua, al punto de que al día de hoy podemos contabilizar 7 universidades que originalmente eran privadas, confiscadas por el gobierno de Nicaragua y pasadas al control estatal. La razón por la cual se confiscan estas instituciones académicas es precisamente porque están fuera del espectro del control partidario del gobierno de turno, y le representaba incomodidad o le representaba al gobierno un riesgo para la hegemonía que quiere mantener en todas las organizaciones académicas en Nicaragua. Es importante mencionar que la autonomía universitaria en Nicaragua está plasmada en una ley, sin embargo, no se ha respetado en lo absoluto, y mucho menos del 2018 a la fecha, bajo la crisis sociopolítica que estamos viviendo en nuestro país. Y los principios de libertad académica que fueron publicados por la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos el año pasado ni siquiera han sido tomados en cuenta por el Estado nicaragüense para implementar uno siquiera de los puntos de los 16 principios que fueron orientados por parte de la Comisión Interamericana. Hay un completo rechazo, hay un completo indiferencia por parte del Estado nicaragüense y por su gobierno de turno, por respetar la libertad estudiantil, por respetar la libertad académica, por respetar la autonomía universitaria, a tal punto que yo quisiera mencionar de manera personal lo que también me ha ocurrido a mí. Yo en el año 2018 fui impedido de terminar mi carrera. Yo estaba en 5º año de la carrera de medicina y fui expulsado por ser una persona crítica, por haberme manifestado a favor de los derechos estudiantiles, por haber tomado algún rol de liderazgo en cierto momento en protestas cívicas y pacíficas por el respeto a los derechos de los jóvenes. Y el mes pasado también fui impedido de terminar mi segunda carrera, en este caso Ciencias Políticas, porque el gobierno nicaragüense clausuró la universidad en la que yo estaba estudiando y la tomó como propia en un acto de confiscación que también es una transgresión completa de la autonomía universitaria, de la libertad académica y de la Constitución Política nicaragüense, que en su resumen es una gran transgresión a los derechos humanos, no solo de las poblaciones jóvenes, sino también de las poblaciones de académicos que se vieron afectados y las poblaciones de jóvenes que aspiraban a entrar a una universidad que no estuviera partidizada por el Estado nicaragüense, que ahora ya no quedan porque las que eran privadas fueron tomadas por la fuerza. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Elton. Gracias, Oshi. Un aporte muy importante de la situación que está sucediendo en la región, donde se ve todas estas tendencias, no solo de afectaciones institucionales, sino también en la comunidad académica, sus miembros, su futuro, su medio laboral, su medio familiar, social, económico. Tenemos el honor de tener a Pedro Vaca, es el Special Rapporteur de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos. Él es pues un abogado colombiano, compatriota de la Universidad Nacional de Colombia, y también fue director ejecutivo de la Fundación de la Libertad de Prensa, la FLIP, en Colombia. Pedro Vaca Villarreal, Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos. Pedro, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Te transmitimos todos estos reportes de casos, reportes regionales, porque también queremos enfocarnos en la solución, no solamente en mencionar un montón de problemas que están sucediendo y que todos son muy similares, sino qué están haciendo las entidades gubernamentales, las multiestatales, para poner una herramienta en las manos de las comunidades académicas para empezar a proteger la libertad académica en la región. Gracias, Pedro.
Muchas gracias, Catalina. En primer lugar, quisiera agradecer a la Coalición por la Libertad Académica en las Américas. Creo que es un liderazgo muy importante y creo que es un escenario además valioso para transmitir a quienes me han antecedido en el uso de la palabra en mi mayor solidaridad. Saben también del compromiso de la oficina a mi cargo para documentar estos casos y avanzar en lo que está al alcance de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos para acompañar este gran desafío. Me debato mucho en el idioma para participar. Creo que es el primer espacio en el cual me encuentro con este concepto de justicia idiomática y entonces creo que es muy valioso que eso se haga. Después vi los nombres de las personas participantes y dije, bueno, si están la mayoría son anglófonos, hablaré en inglés, si son hispanohablantes, hablaré en español, y veo que también está mezclado, con lo cual quisiera también resaltar la diversidad de este foro, de esta comunidad. Entonces haré el mejor esfuerzo para hacerlo en los dos idiomas, ¿no? para que pueda ser de consumo equivalente para las distintas audiencias. Quisiera comentarles que para mí creo que es un privilegio, pero también creo que es una enorme oportunidad el haber podido ser parte del proceso final dentro de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, que nos llevó a que en diciembre del año pasado se publicaran los principios interamericanos sobre libertad académica y autonomía universitaria. Este es un proceso sostenido más o menos desde el año 2015. Creo que también es hacer justicia hablar de las personas que lo impulsaron, principalmente la excomisionada Flavia Piovesan, que desde su convicción sobre la importancia de la libertad en las aulas universitarias dinamizó muchas conversaciones que llevaron a este punto. Este es un documento emitido por la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos en conjunto con sus dos relatorías especiales, la Relatoría para los Derechos Económicos, Sociales, Culturales y Ambientales, a cargo de Soledad García Muñoz, y la que está a mi cargo, la Relatoría Especial para la Libertad de Expresión, con el aporte además de diversos sectores de la sociedad civil, de la academia, de los estados, y que pone de manifiesto varios desafíos que tienen que ver también con instrumentos internacionales que los mismos estados han ratificado. Aquí creo que ese es un aspecto importante, y es que el preámbulo de la Declaración de Principios también es una suerte de estado de arte del derecho internacional de los derechos humanos con respecto a el núcleo esencial del derecho a la libertad académica. De hecho, esta es una declaración de principios que se anima a dibujarla como un derecho en sí mismo, ¿no? Dependiente e interdependiente de otros derechos humanos, pero es algo que se plantea y que la Comisión deliberó y consideró. Y cuando hablamos de un derecho humano independiente, interdependiente, tiene que ver sobre todo con la función habilitante que tiene la libertad académica en el ejercicio de la libertad de expresión, el derecho a la educación, el derecho de reunión, el derecho a la libertad de conciencia, a la libertad de asociación, a la igualdad ante la ley, la libertad de conciencia, la libertad de religión, y también los derechos laborales y sindicales, y el derecho a los beneficios de la cultura y el progreso. Luego estamos hablando de un abanico muy amplio de elementos que se condensan dentro del el derecho a la libertad académica que aquí se plantea. Now I'll switch to English. So I think it's very important to have a regional context that I think was absolutely highlighted by the speakers that were previous to me. So the Inter-American principles of academic freedom and university autonomy were conceived with the purpose of creating a tool, an instrument to strengthen the protection of the academic community and the struggle for the defense of academic freedom. In this sense, one of the purposes of the Inter-American principles is to understand academic freedom as an autonomous right in its multidimensional and interdependent nature with other freedoms and human rights. Through these principles, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights also expresses its concerns for the reports in several countries on the hemisphere on cases of repression against student groups and university unions, as well as the situation of harassment, hostility, attacks, budget cuts to academic institutions, and also the retaliation of various kinds of against members of the academic community, which compromise or prevent the viability of university, the pluralism of ideas, and the scientific development. In this sense, the Inter-American Commission and its special rapporteurs have documented various patterns and state policies that reveal an autocracy context that does not coexist with minimum standards of academic freedom or freedom of expression. And on the contrary, tend to suffocate the critical, plural, diverse thinking promoted by universities and academic institutions. In this context, it's relevant to mention the fact that students, faculties, academic staff, researchers, and other individuals and institutions that belongs or are part of the academic community play an essential role in the promotion of democratic principles, the appropriation of human rights, and the fight against authoritarianism in the Americas. As a consequence of their academic activities, these individuals are subject to a special vulnerability in non-democratic context. We have heard a couple of speakers that also are struggling with non-democratic context, as they may face restrictions, risk, and violations on their human rights as a result of their research, thought, and critical expressions, especially when they are involved in the discussions of matters of public interest, and therefore they should enjoy special protection. To that extent, the principles seeks to respond to the regional reality, because this is happening nowadays, and continue a step forward in the progressiveness of human rights and the protection of academic community. Likewise, the principles help to guarantee the activities carried out by these groups of people through the precision of standards that protect academic freedoms in all its dimensions, and university autonomy as a guarantee against external pressure that may be exerted by states. Faced with the risks posed by critical...
Yeah, this is she.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Faced with the risk posed by critical academic activity in non-authoritarian context, the principle responds by establishing clear criteria in relation to the state's human rights obligations. Now I want to proceed. I don't know if I am out of time, but if possible, I would like to take a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
For a brief explanation of the principles. I want to go through the 16 principles that I think are really important. First, the scope of academic freedom encompasses both its individual and collective dimensions, which is something that we consider while we were drafting the principles of academic freedom. Another crucial aspect is the autonomy of academic institutions as a prerequisite and guarantee for higher education institutions to fulfill their mission and objectives, This implies that state regulation should guarantee the autonomy and self-government of academic institutions, and that public budgets should be proportional so that they can develop their activities with equal autonomy. A central axis of the declaration is the principle of non-discrimination. It is essential that academic freedom be promoted, protected, and guaranteed in equal opportunities without discrimination of any grounds. But there is also a duty to eliminate conditions of structural discrimination in the academic sphere. For example, through measures to promote equal access and career development. At the same time, measures should be taken to eradicate gender stereotyped obstacles faced by women in the academia. Another highly relevant aspect that the declaration includes is the right to be protected against illegitimate or disproportionate interference by a state. For example, through budgetary measures, non-renewal of authorizations to operate, as well as disproportionate interference in the curricula or academic programs, among others. In turn, the principles also play an important role in pronouncing on the due response that states should have to situations of violence and physical aggressions against individuals or institutions due their participation in the academic community or exercise of activities, as well as physical attacks against institutions, libraries, or laboratories. States must prevent and investigate these acts. The states must punish the perpetrators and ensure adequate reparation for the victims. Otherwise, such attacks have the potential to curtail academic freedoms and sow self-censorship in the society. Without going in each of them in depth, it is worth mentioning that the Declaration of Principles also covers other highly relevant aspects, criteria against restrictions and limitations by the states on academic freedom, the prohibition of censorship and exceptionally of state punitive exercise, the adoption of measures to guarantee human rights, education, access to information, the importance of the internet and other technologies for protecting academic freedom, the protection and international mobility and cooperation, and the inclusive dialogue within the framework of higher education. I would like to highlight a word that it's in the
Pedro, por favor.
To highlight a word that it's included in the principles, which is taboo. And that word came to this not because it was a creation of the commission. It comes from Timothy Garton-Ash, that has shared a set of principles on freedom of expression nowadays. And he said, we allow no taboos against and seize every chance for the spread of knowledge. And I think this is the main enemy that we have ahead. Taboos against knowledge, and we have to fight against those taboos, and there's people that wants to put the seeds of taboos, and I think these principles could contribute for more knowledge, more discussions, for the academics to play the role that we have given to them in democratic societies. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Gracias, Pedro. Thank you very much. Before letting you go, I have a question to finalize this part and given space for questions for the public, from the public. I would like to ask you like a clue for us to start the discussion for the second part. So we have these principles, we have these theoretical framework to protect academic freedom among our institutions. So what the Inter-American Commission would like us to do with them? How can we turn or make this principles a living reality in our own countries, because that is the main aspect of having them, is not only keeping them in paper, but also using them. I mean, transform them into an effective tool to defend our communities, academic communities. What do you think? 30 seconds.
Okay, 30 seconds. Because I asked for more time and I leave earlier. So this is, and I apologize for this. But okay, I would suggest that, I mean, first of all, it's very important that the Commission has principles. It's not an instrument or a mechanism that is used for all the situations. They're very specific. So I think that that also shows the relevance that for the Commission has this topic. Secondly, as you could see, the Commission has published other set of principles. The one that is closer to me is the principles for freedom of expression that were published in early 2000s. And my conclusion is that principles succeeds with the condition of that the community is engaged with them.
Exactly.
So, and that means a lot of things. I think to start discussions like this, to analyze the principles, to also getting deep with cases that could show a part or a specific principle. Also, I think that it's very important to look for OAS member states that could be champion of this, because we also need good examples, and we need at our political dimensions of the hemisphere state actors that could be engaged. So it's easier for us to have cases from those countries that are non-democratic or where the civic space is being shrink, but we also need partners, no? So to establish in the future a core group or a group of friends of countries that could have like the moral status and the ethical status to back this agenda, I think is really important. And also cases. We are open to document and receive cases, and we have, I thank this space because it's also an opportunity to share with a very specialized community, something that for us is also so important. So I would like use us for that. I mean, we are also an office that is in charge of promoting this kind of mechanisms.
Yeah, trying to link your comments to Elton's comments, where he said that the government of Nicaragua is aware of the existence of these principles, but hasn't done anything about with them. Is not only a role from the state, it's also the role of the movements, the student movement, the internal government of the university, the institutions that are supporting those universities, that should be aware of this existence and the way to use these principles in order to protect academic freedom among societies. Do you agree with us?
Stronger the community, stronger the principles. That's directly proportional. And we are just starting. This is like a baby born set of principles. But when we look at what is happening in the region, and when we analyze what could happen, because it's not only of countries that are showing signs of these taboos, it's also the potential that societies where taboos were not, I mean, probably those taboos are coming back. So these principles also, I mean, it tends to be corrective, but also preventive. And I think the community should look at in those specific scenarios simultaneously.
Perfect. Thank you, Pedro. We invite you to stay a little bit more for the questions, and I open the floor for everyone to ask the speakers questions and share your ideas with them. And we have Nelson Rivas, who wrote us, and he has a question. Nelson, bienvenido.
Muchas gracias, estimada profesora. Saludos a todos y de verdad pues muy contento de participar en este foro donde pues hemos escuchado una pequeña perspectiva sobre situaciones preocupantes en Brasil, en México y en Nicaragua. Nuestra solidaridad con Nicaragua, la verdad. Les habla Nelson Rivas, yo soy investigador en Derechos Humanos en el Observatorio de Derechos Humanos de la Universidad de los Andes en Mérida, en Venezuela, y también pues formo parte de la junta directiva de la organización Epiqueya Derechos Humanos, que pues, también trabaja en conjunto con el observatorio. Yo quisiera complementar la intervención pues, que ha hecho nuestro colega de Aula Abierta sobre Venezuela, y es que nosotros estamos en el centro de una discusión bastante preocupante sobre una ley de universidades que se está gestando en el seno del Consejo Nacional de Universidades y también en la Asamblea Nacional del país, que por cierto es afín al gobierno de Maduro, y manifestamos nuestra preocupación porque hasta el momento no se conoce el texto oficial que esta comisión de la Asamblea Nacional está trabajando, y nos tememos que puedan venir muchos más ataques a la libertad académica y en especial a la autonomía universitaria dentro de esto. Cabe resaltar que en Venezuela más del 90% de las universidades no son autónomas, puesto que en 2003 el expresidente Chávez impuso un sistema paralelo de universidades destinado a ideologizar y a hacer proselitismo político. De hecho, nosotros tenemos una investigación que se llama Universidades Paralelas en Venezuela, donde hemos documentado cómo el gobierno de entre 2003 y 2017 destinó cerca de 2.200 millones de dólares solamente a programas de ideologización y proselitismo político en estas instituciones. Por otra parte, una investigación más reciente de la organización Conectas de Brasil y de un diario digital de acá de Venezuela que se llama El Pitazo, han determinado que por lo menos 50.000 millones de dólares han sido destinados a este sistema paralelo de universidades para construir infraestructura y entre otras cosas, ¿no? Estas universidades no tienen una calidad académica, discriminan políticamente a estudiantes y profesores. Nosotros acompañamos un caso de un estudiante que fue expulsado de la Universidad Bolivariana de Venezuela solamente por cambiar el canal de televisión que estaba sintonizado en la CIDH. Y bueno, es más o menos el panorama que tenemos. Recientemente nosotros hemos denunciado ante el Sistema de Naciones Unidas en el examen periódico universal este sistema paralelo de universidades, y hemos recibido una recomendación por parte de la delegación diplomática de Uruguay ante el Consejo para que este sistema sea integrado al sistema de universidades autónomas, y bueno, estamos esperando la aceptación por parte del Estado. Entonces estamos trabajando en esto. Nosotros quisiéramos también que Scholars Africs nos acompañaran en esta solicitud, y bueno, todos los que están en este foro para que
Gracias, Nelson.
hacer presión para que el gobierno pueda aceptar, se vea en la obligación de aceptar estas recomendaciones en el tiempo.
Gracias, Nelson, te agradecemos mucho. Esa es la idea de la coalición, que ustedes puedan contar con una red de aliados que emerja desde desde abajo hasta arriba. ¿Hay alguna otra pregunta para entonces darle paso a la segunda parte de este webinar? ¿Tenemos alguien más? Salvador, mi colega.
Hola, muy buenas tardes, buenos días a todas y todos. Mi nombre es Salvador Herencia, también de la Universidad de Ottawa. Señor relator, muchísimas gracias por su presentación. Como siempre, es un placer tenerlo acá con nosotros. Usted dijo en su presentación algo que creo que es muy importante, ¿no? Cuanto más fuerte es la comunidad, más fuerte van a ser los principios. Y el paralelo que usted ha hecho con los principios de relatoría de libertad de expresión son fundamentales. Siguen vigentes 20 y tantos años, casi 20 años después. Y hoy mucho más con las tonteras que la gente dice en redes sociales. Pero los principios y la libertad académica o el derecho a la libertad académica es un tema relativamente nuevo independientemente de la apropiación por parte de estados e instituciones académicas, ¿sería posible pensar en un informe temático que podamos avanzar y desarrollar mucho más los principios que permitan no solamente llevar casos ante el sistema, pero también implementar mecanismos nacionales? Muchas gracias nuevamente por estar con nosotros.
Gracias, Salvador. Pedro.
Muchas gracias, Salvador. La respuesta es sí, la respuesta es sí, pero quisiera complementarla un poco con dos elementos, ¿no? El primero es, naturalmente es algo que tiene que pasar por la comisión. Entonces creo que en ese sentido transmitir a la comisión, a sus integrantes, la pertinencia, la utilidad que tendría esto, creo que viene a ser también muy importante, ¿no? Porque pues nosotros al final somos una oficina que hace parte de o que está subordinada a un colegiado, y creo que eso es importante, más allá de lo que yo pueda creer o lo que yo pueda hacer. Lo segundo, y creo que la experiencia de los principios de libertad de expresión es muy valiosa también al respecto, y es, después de los principios de libertad de expresión han surgido muchos tipos de informes temáticos y ciertamente creo que tienen la característica de abordar granularmente un problema. Es decir, por ejemplo, los principios hablan de no discriminación, entonces uno podría pensar en expandir ese principio a través de un informe temático que haga una reflexión más profunda de lo que se pudo hacer en la Declaración de Principios publicada en diciembre, y que pueda servir más como una pauta más práctica para entender, aterrizar ese principio. O tecnología, acceso a la información, que es otro de los principios, qué tipo de recomendaciones se pueden hacer para que el conocimiento que se produce no sea un conocimiento que queda perdido en un algoritmo, sino que pueda ser un conocimiento que... Y creo que ese tipo de preguntas se pueden hacer. Y pues naturalmente es algo que depende de la capacidad humana y financiera de hacerlo, ¿no? Porque los informes temáticos también tardan no solo un tiempo, sino que implican un esfuerzo de participación, de la capacidad humana para hacerlo, pero definitivamente sí. Ahora es difícil.
Gracias, Pedro. Gracias, Salvador. Tenemos una última intervención. Pues como líder de este webinar, Jessie Levine, me dice que vamos a empezar a la 1:30 la segunda parte. Entonces, Rosario, por favor, haz una pregunta muy breve y una respuesta muy breve. No te oímos.
¿Ahora?
Sí.
¿Sí? Bueno, mucho gusto, muchas gracias por la invitación. Mi nombre es Rosario Figari Layus, soy investigadora en la Universidad de Gießen en Alemania, y estoy realizando una investigación comparada apoyada por Scholars at Risk entre Colombia y Brasil, y las dinámicas de violencia contra investigadores y profesores, pero también sobre el rol de las universidades en la protección o no a los académicos. Y en ese sentido quería preguntar también al relator, es como resultado de esta investigación también tienen que salir unas directrices con recomendaciones para las universidades, o sea, no solo el Estado es responsable de dar respuesta, sino también que las universidades no pueden seguir teniendo un rol tan pasivo, o en muchos casos tan perjudiciales incluso, para sus propios académicos. Entonces quería preguntarle a él, creo que hay una parte también de los principios que habla justamente de la responsabilidad de las universidades como instituciones para tomar medidas activas para apoyar a académicos en riesgo en América Latina, que de hecho creo que no, bueno, hasta ahora lo que yo voy averiguando no es que estén haciendo demasiado, incluso en algunos casos contribuyen a la criminalización. Entonces, bueno, quería saber su perspectiva sobre eso.
Gracias, Rosario. Pedro, muy breve, por favor.
Muchas gracias, Rosario. Creo que es importante marcar que nosotros somos una oficina que está en una institución que hace parte de una organización de estados. Luego, buena parte del foco de todas las acciones que hacemos es dar recomendaciones a los estados, dentro de ellos los principios, para que los estados, como garantes de los derechos humanos, entre ellos la libertad académica, optimicen su respuesta en términos de protección. ¿no? Y creo que en lo que tú planteas ahí, obligatoriamente hay dos capas de análisis. Las universidades de origen público que administran recursos públicos frente a las cuales incluso la Declaración de Principios marca unos deberes acentuados. Y después hay otro universo de las universidades que ni administran recursos públicos ni tienen origen público. Yo creo que ahí los principios pueden ser un marco de análisis muy importante, pero en definitiva, digamos, sí hay un deber acentuado en el marco censurar el conocimiento es malo donde quiera ocurra. Ahora es mucho más reprochable en una sociedad democrática cuando eso ocurre a instancias del poder estatal o con patrocinio del poder estatal.
Gracias, Pedro. Profe Joao, lamentablemente no voy a
Muito
poder
curto.
darle la palabra. Ok,
Es mucho corto. It's really just to complement quite quickly what Pedro said, and no, this idea of straining to communities, because the situation is very different across Latin America. In some contexts, it is possible to have more institutional resistance from public prosecutors, for instance. In other contexts, this political juridical structures, they are being weaponized by states as the university bureaucracy. Like just the grinding internally through the bureaucracy is an issue that sometimes we do not see the attention of. Like, for instance, in Brazil, you need to be authorized by the federal government to leave the country for a conference. But this operates in a very fine bureaucratical level, and you may target people. When you appoint senior officials just to little positions that may funnel resources and access to knowledge may be an issue, and definitely like in strengthening communities also pass through this level to finding allies within like each structure, within universities, within public prosecutor officers, within the judiciary, within the political sector, wherever is available.
Thank you, Joao. So thank you very much for all the information that the speakers share with us, the questions that you asked them. Gracias a todos los profesores, Pedro, por estar aquí. Finalizamos entonces la segunda etapa, la primera etapa de este webinar, y le damos paso a la segunda, que es ya cómo construir esta coalición y fortalecer la protección de la libertad académica en la región. Le doy paso entonces a Rafael. Rafael Ibarra Garza es un abogado mexicano. Estudió en la Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León y después estudió su Master Degree y su PhD en la Universidad Panthéon-Assas de París. Es un académico de la Universidad de Monterrey, profesor e investigador, y también pues como un investigador muy importante. El profesor Ibarra es nuestro colega, uno de los project coordinators de esta coalición, y entonces Rafael, ojalá puedas hacer un mejor trabajo que yo como monitora en esta discusión, pero la situación es tan apasionante, las perspectivas de solución y de empoderamiento de la comunidad académica es tan apasionante que no podíamos dejar de compartirlo.
Sí,
gracias.
Claro. Muchas gracias. Se comprende que la importancia del tema va mucho más allá de 1 o 2 horas, ¿no? Y por eso se comprende que cada quien quería comentar lo que tenía que decir al respecto. So I'm going to talk in English from now on. My name is Rafael Ibarra Garza, and how they said I'm from the University of Monterrey. I'm very happy and it's an honor to moderate the present roundtable, building a coalition to respond to attacks and strengthening a culture of academic freedom. This webinar is the next step in the process of developing the Coalition for Academic Freedom in the Americas, what has previously been referred to as the Americas Hub. led by the University of Monterrey, the Human Rights Research and Education Center of the University of Ottawa, and Scholars at Risk. The coalition is a platform through which scholars, academics, institutions, students, advocates, NGOs, and others can partner to increase awareness and advocacy in defense of academic freedom throughout the Americas. Hopefully, you already have a sense not just of the challenges that our colleagues are facing, but of the significant progress that has been made recently in the developing of norms and principles to protect academic freedom. But the goal of this webinar is a lot more than information sharing. We hope to build buy-in, expanding the partnerships that are at the heart of the coalition, and ensuring that each of us has the opportunity to contribute to this important work. First, by being a part of an ongoing developing conversation about academic freedom in the Americas. Second, by making that conversation a part of campus life whenever possible. And third, by bringing our unique expertise and capacities to advocacy and other activities aimed to promoting and protecting academic freedom as needed. The project seeks a holistic approach to assure academic freedom. We need to assess what needs to be done to create change, not only to address individual situations, which is of course very important, but above all to address the problem at large. Beyond responding to individual cases, we must proactively create a culture that helps prevent future violations to our right of academic freedom. Let us go now to our roundtable, where we have the privilege to have 3 experts in the subject. Before we start, let me introduce each of our speakers. First of all, we have Viviana Fernandez. She is the Assistant Director at the Human Rights Research and Education Center of the University of Ottawa. Viviana currently chairs the Canadian section of the Scholars at Risk SAR network and represents Canada in the SAR's International Advisory Committee. We also have the roundtable Jesse Levine. He serves as Senior Advocacy Officer at Scholars at Risk, where he co-leads much of the organization's international legal advocacy, including before the UN, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, state bodies, and others. Jesse is a lawyer who has spent time working for Human Rights Watch. And we have Adam Braver, who serves as a coordinator of SAR's Students Advocacy Seminar Program, working to provide university and college students with an opportunity to develop human rights research and advocacy skills through direct engagements on behalf of threatened members of the global higher education community. At Rogers Williams University, he is the library program director and on faculty in the Department of English Literature and Creative Writing. Before we start, I would like to explain the dynamics of our roundtable. I will ask each one of our panelists a question. Afterwards, the panelists are free to ask each other questions. If no questions are asked, I will continue with my queries. And at the end, we will leave some time for questions from the public. Now, taking in mind, it's already 11:30, we should finish at about 2 o'clock at New York time. So let me start with the questions. The first round of questions, it would be first to Viviana. I would like to talk, if you can talk about what you have done at an institutional level. How did your institution and yourself get involved with Scholars at Risk and academic freedom advocacy? Thank you, Viviana.
Thank you, Rafael. It's great to be here today and to share a little bit of our experience as the University of Ottawa and Human Rights Center in the context of the work we have done with Scholars at Risk and other partners. So the university was invited or was aware of the Scholars at Risk network through partner university, the Carleton University, which is also in Ottawa. And it was really an initiative that was born through the provost level. They, the 2 provosts got together and decided that it was a good way to begin delving into this work to join forces, if you want, to host scholars as a first step. So when the provost decided to accept this invitation, they immediately thought that the Human Rights Center would be the perfect home for this initiative, not only because we had a little bit of a structure and capacity, but obviously there was an affinity in terms of the type of work we had been doing as an academic institution that is now celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. So as assistant director, it came a little bit as a natural fit for me to help create a committee that would become the pillars of the work in campus. And today, this committee includes faculty, student representatives, representatives from the Professors Association, as well as staff members. So the program ran as a joint initiative, and we were able to host 3 scholars until 2017, at which point both universities decided that it was time to act independently, because not only we could continue to collaborate and share with each other which scholars we were hosting and try to provide a better fit for the community in each of the fields, but we were at a stage where we could engage in other activities. And so in 2018, we were delighted to launch a clinic project, which is currently coordinated by Catalina, who moderated the previous session, and with involvement of Joao Veloso and Salvador Herencia, to monitor 7 countries in the Americas, including Canada, in terms of the academic freedom monitoring project that Scholars at Risk was undertaking. So that has been a very interesting experience that has allowed us to incorporate students into our work. We issue every year a report that accounts for the attacks we are monitoring, and that feeds into the work of of Scholars at Risk and the Free to Think report. And a newer iteration of this work has been, of course, to work in advocacy initiatives, and to also launch in 2021 the Remote Scholars Initiative, which benefits scholars in Venezuela in particular. So we have tried to do a few things in terms of how do we engage with the program. We also work with Scholars Rescue Fund, which allows us to host scholars with additional resources. And we try as much as possible to incorporate students into the work we are doing.
Thank you very much, Viviana. Adam, could you please talk about your experience in leading student advocacy, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And thanks for having me. And this has all been really, really interesting from all the way through. The Scholars at Risk has a program which I have both worked teaching in, but now mostly coordinating in terms of leading students on advocacy projects. It's a student advocacy seminars program through Scholars at Risk. They're faculty-led courses that work on behalf of unjustly detained scholars who generally come from Scholars at Risk's Scholars in Prison project, and often looking at the scholars that are priority cases in terms of need. They are practical courses, meaning that there is a theoretical component, but it is not working in terms of the hypothetical. It is working on behalf of somebody who is in need at that particular moment. We have seminars throughout the world, primarily North America and Western Europe right now. And we are working hard in many respects to replicate the network aspect of the Scholars at Risk network, and to have students involved in a network of advocacy as well, working with each other. What do students do in these? Students research the cases, they research the context behind the cases, the underlying causes that lead to the scholars being harassed and threatened and detained. They will learn and develop, develop and implement advocacy strategies, and develop and have that as a primary focus of their work, and also work toward, you know, on a more conceptual level, work towards shedding light on these cases that are often people who are intentionally kept literally in the dark, giving voice to those who are silenced, improving conditions for the detainees, and also never to be neglected is supporting the family members in these cases who in many respects are equally victimized in different ways. Students work on governmental avenues. They work on local awareness building within their own communities, building global awareness, often through social media, developing petitions, the type of advocacy work that we think of. And again, trying to work collaboratively with other students from around the world on similar cases to create global voice and a global movement, because it is, we have learned, much more powerful when there are voices from all over the world raising concerns about an individual case rather than just somebody localized to the region, or someone even more who's perceived as that's their job to do that. But when there are students from around the world working on that. The only thing I'd add is, you know, and then we could talk in more detail if questions come up, is each course really needs to decide and evaluate the context in which they can work both safely and soundly, and how they feel they can make the most effective impact. We support the efforts of any class, however they need support in terms of access to information, finding people with expertise in the country, in the case, in the legal system, you know, whatever is needed. But again, we trust different institutions to know their own limitations and what they believe they can do most effectively.
Thank you very much, Adam. Jesse, could you please describe the legal advocacy side of the Americas Coalition work, please?
Sure. Thank you all. So I'll describe, first of all, SAR's legal advocacy work up to now, and then talk a little bit about where we think we're going with the coalition. So I think a lot of people on this call are already familiar with a lot of the advocacy work that we do. We've talked about it already. A lot of it begins, and it's sort of its backbone is our monitoring work. That's documenting and tracking attacks on higher education, from killings, violence, and disappearances, to imprisonment, to expulsion, restrictions on travel, wrongful arrests, and other significant attacks on higher education. With that data as the foundation of our work, we engage in advocacy where it's appropriate, where we think we can make a difference. One very sort of frequent form of advocacy that we engage in is before the UN within the Universal Periodic Review System. We also engage in advocacy before international treaty bodies and special procedures, you know, based on individual countries that we think really need to be highlighted as problematic in some way. Finally, we also advocate, well, not finally, we advocate on behalf, when appropriate, on behalf of individuals or in relation to individual problem situations. And then we engage in sort of broader ranging advocacy. For example, engaging with the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of opinion and expression in connection with his recent report on academic freedom, as well as our work with Pedro and his colleagues at the IACHR on the principles that he talked about in the last session. So that's sort of a very, very, very rough overall picture of the advocacy work that we've engaged in to date, which, you know, largely is legal advocacy, or is sort of or is related in some way to the law or standards or norms that are relevant to academic freedom. Where I think this work is going is toward an acknowledgement that just dealing with those things, just dealing with the law and norms and standards doesn't really get you the whole way to where we want to go. We really have to be engaged in an effort to build these norms onto campus, you know, on campuses as a sort of daily reality of academic life, as a set of ideology, of ideals that inform the way students and professors and other university people see the relation between the state and their institution, their relations with each other, and the relationships between universities and society generally. So how do we do that? Well, one thing that we are focused on is expanding our advocacy work. Certainly the legal advocacy, if we do this well, will increase in the coming years, especially with the tool of the principles. You know, this will empower our work in a big way. But it also means generating content on campus. We've talked, one thing that we're excited about is conferences that are going to come up in connection with the coalition. It'll give us all an opportunity to sort of underscore the problems in our own countries and put our heads together about ways to respond, sort of advocacy techniques, and how to, what the needs of particular crisis situations are, you know, both at the time that they're coming up and over the, you know, in the medium term. We'll also be issuing calls for papers, which I think are going to be really, really important in terms of generating doctrine that I think has the potential to be influential, both in terms of underscoring areas that really haven't been discussed yet within the conversation about academic freedom, and giving voice to individuals within our community who have expertise that has yet to be harnessed. I'm running a little bit long, so I'll stop there, and we can make this more of a true roundtable.
If nobody of you have a question to others panelists, I will keep on doing some questions. Okay, so Adam, seeing that students have a hands-on approach in the student advocacy seminar, I suppose their perspectives change, right? From when they start the seminar and after the seminar. Could you describe those changes you see in your students, please?
Yeah, and I think, you know, and you're absolutely right. You know, their perspectives change I'd say in a number of different areas, and probably different per student depending on what they come in with it. But I would say some of the general areas are, well, you know, the most basic, and I think the level and the one we probably most appreciate is the idea that they can have a voice, that they have often perceive themselves as not having any power or agency in which to affect any level of change, and they discovered that they do have that, and depending on where they are, we have students, for example, that'll go to Washington, D.C. We have a group of students for our student advocacy days going in a couple of weeks, and even the realization that they can walk into the office of a member of Congress and have the ability to state the case and make requests. I mean, they don't always get fulfilled, but like anybody else, or our Canadian students that have tabled motions in Parliament and found that they have the power to do that. So I think that's really important, and I think it's something that is important to the cases they're working on, but also important to whatever projects and advocacy needs that they will encounter later in their life, whether it is working on human rights issues, whether it is working on issues within their own communities and supporting people in their own communities, developing not only the skills, but the confidence and the belief that their voices can matter. I would also say that there is a reverse to that of some people also finding the limitations and the obstacles that come with that. And learning because they want somebody freed from jail doesn't mean the person's going to get freed from jail because they said they want the person free from jail, and learning the various steps, learning the small steps, the small victories. I often talk to them about it in terms of archaeology, that it's a matter of finding little shards to start building the larger map of civilization instead of just uncovering a rock and finding everything at once. So I think that's also an important learning skill at the same time. This is just the having people's eyes opened to the different contexts that other people around the world live in, their own freedoms, particularly those in the United States and in Western Europe and Canada, who have an expectation of freedom of expression, of freedom of speech, of the ability to post whatever they want on their social media and not suffer repercussions. I think also becomes very eye-opening and develops in them, or at least instills in them, a sense of responsibility to use the voice that they do have the freedom to have, to use that voice on behalf of people who are having their voices silenced.
Thank you. Now, Viviana, we know the importance of the subject and the size of the problems we are confronted. So it is impossible to attack this problem without a network of institutions and universities that can work to topple this problem. So the question for you is, what obstacles or major obstacles do you find yourself with when engaging with new partners and institutions in this subject?
So what we have seen in the context of the Canadian Scholars at Risk section is, as you say, the scope of the problem may seem daunting, and then to have ambassadors or champions in your campus that may be willing to take this challenge and decide where to start. Some have shied away from joining the network or the groups because they see the funding as a main obstacle to be able to host scholars. However, there are alternatives to having to have the funding outright all in your budget. And there are many creative solutions that have come out from member institutions, like doing fundraising campaigns, like engaging with faculty unions and other unions in your campus, using endowed funding for specific placements, or existing postdoctoral fellowships, for instance, and other types of visiting researcher fellowships that could be earmarked for scholars at risk. So that I think are good ways to counter the financial, the seemingly important financial obstacles that some people see. We know that colleagues across campuses are very busy, and this work is also not necessarily part of their academic workload. However, when you can, as Adam was describing, integrate part of the advocacy actions into your courses, then not only it creates a better experience from the student's perspective, so the experiential learning type of strategies, but it will in turn create much more engaged alumni when they go into the community and speak to the type of experiences they had during their studies. So from an institutional perspective, I think having the ability to help form and train these mobilizers is definitely a win-win. Having also scholars at risk that have come to us and be able to speak to students or contribute to courses and workshops, seminars, as well as speaking to graduate students working in countries where they come from, or that have expertise and research questions in areas that they can contribute, has also proven to be an absolutely clear way to put to contribution the learnings and expertise from these colleagues, and not only benefits the colleague at the scholar at risk, but it shows the value for to the students who are involved.
Just one follow-up question. Have you found lack of empathy of other institutions or of other colleagues a major problem in academic freedom?
Not really. I would say that unfortunately, and yet fortunately, the recent crisis we have seen in Afghanistan and Ukraine have become a huge motor in terms of awakening people who were maybe on the fence, people who thinking that, you know, objectively, yes, they were pro participating, but never found the time. And then in terms of the Canadian section in particular, we have now 3 new members since the summer of 2021. So I think these are moments where we can all reach out to colleagues and let them know what we're doing. There have been a number of us who have contributed to articles or blogs or events. And so then other people see or hear about it, and then we get questions from new institutions that were not yet part of the section. So I think these moments of crisis have become have given us a little bit more to talk about and to show in terms of our work.
Thank you, Viviana. Jesse, could you please list broadly the contributions that you see that the coalition members will be making in the near future?
Sure. So I can list the ones that I can see, but I want to emphasize that there are probably a lot that I can't see. The idea here is, you know, each according to their ability, and to assess capacity now and capacity in the future, to try and figure out capacity in the future, and to understand that, you know, opportunity favors the prepared. And by engaging in this dialogue now, even if your institution doesn't have, you know, the capacity to host a scholar or do an event or start a clinic, just by being here, by being in this ongoing conversation, by receiving the newsletter that's going to be coming out, by perusing the website, you are joining this coalition. And we believe that that sets us up for something that's sustainable and powerful in the long term, that's populated by people with a variety of expertise and experience and perspective, who will be able to tell us about problems that we wouldn't otherwise see and about their solutions. So as far as substantive work, you know, as I said before, there are a few things that are on my mind that I'm excited about beyond the kind of core advocacy work that we're doing, that we're going to be continuing to do, and we will be expanding. So I think I can't underscore enough the importance of a call for academic papers that I think will be circulating in the near term. as I think about, as I envision that, one example of what that could look like would be, consider Venezuela. So as many of us already knew, and as we heard today, Venezuela has been in crisis for, more than a decade now. They have two tracks of universities that are given inequitable resources, one of which is ideological, one of which is ideally supposed to be to have academic freedom. At some point, God willing, we will be in a post-Maduro era, and Venezuela will be transitional and will be figuring out how to rebuild its university space or alter it in light of new realities. Now I know these conversations are happening among our colleagues. I don't think they're given enough voice internationally. And I think it's part of our job to support those conversations and amplify them where we can, and contribute to them where it's appropriate. And the types of calls for papers that we're going to be making, I think we'll try and harness that energy. Another issue that I think we can work on through sort of all our expertise and by generating a conversation is the issue of academic freedom and gender violence and sexual harassment on campus, and how those things play together. We know it's a huge issue. We've done some work on it, but it's not nearly dealt with enough in a kind of academic way. And we feel that it's crucial that we empower that kind of energy. The people that write those papers now will become experts in in a decade or 2 years or 5 years or a decade in human rights litigation. These papers have the potential to be very influential. So those are a couple of examples of the types of activities that we're very excited about. But again, it's sort of wide open, and I think that's part of the point. So I'd like to say, sort of separately, behind the scenes, we've agreed that we can go for 10 minutes past the deadline if people want to stay for questions. As we approach 2 o'clock, I would like to just let everybody know, as I say, being a part of this conversation is probably the most important single contribution you can make right now, and we want you to continue to be part of this conversation. My colleague, Madeline Everett, will be circulating a survey right after we finish. Please fill it out. Please, signal your availability to be a part of this coalition on an ongoing basis. We know that there are different levels of capacity to engage right now, but having you here is really, I mean this, the most important thing. So it's 2 o'clock. Let's keep going for those who can, for say 10 or 15 minutes, and those who can't. Thank you so much. Thank you to the ISCHR for your partnership, and to all of our partners here. Okay, now we're in OT.
So thank you, Jesse, for your last remarks. As he said, those who want to keep being connected for this informal discussion afterwards with questions from everybody else, you're gladly to stay. So let me just read, before I give the word to Salvador and Elton, who have raised their hands. There was 2 questions established in the chat. So the first question is from Catalina Arango, and it's a question for Adam. How would you engage students and student movements with the promotion and implementation of the principles?
I think that I would probably use the principles as the foundation work in which to approach the advocacy, in the same way that we might, the same way that the specifics of a case might be very pointed to a circumstance, an event, but we might also be looking at academic freedom as really the underpinnings of that, and trying to use that as our guiding ideas or guiding principles for why the case matters, for teaching and understanding, for giving it context, for letting people know why it's important to, and also what it stands for. Because again, we're, while in the seminars we're looking at individual cases, we also are very aware that those individual cases are representing a lot of people, representing an entire situation, and that there is a commonality between that's creating that situation and using it to highlight that.
Now, Maria Cristina Moreno asked the next question for you also, Adam. Do you have experience doing this course, Advocacy, on a comparative scale with colleagues and students in other countries?
We do. So we have seminars in the United States, in Canada, in Germany, in Italy, in Norway. I'm sure I'm leaving it in the UK. And, each country has its own political, cultural, educationally cultural approaches that they bring to the cases. In many respects, very different interpretations of what academic freedom means within their context. So we, from a centralized area, we have to work with each seminar to understand where they're coming from, and how they can apply what the advocacy work, at least, that's coming out of the Scholars at Risk office. At the same time, and of course, we defer to the institutions because they know that their own cultural context much better than I do or we do. And the idea is to intersect those, and the intersection, I think, that happens when you have a seminar in Italy working with a seminar in Canada, is finding that common ground of how to create something, as I said earlier, create more of a global movement, so that the advocacy work, the needs for advocacy become common at that same time. If that makes sense. I think I'm starting to talk abstractly, but trying to find that common ground, so that there is a common effort, even if just starting from a unique standpoint. But again, this is recognizing that certain areas, not only certain countries or certain regions have their own considerations. Sometimes certain universities within certain contexts have their own considerations in terms of their relationships they might have with other countries. We see this a lot, for example, with China, that there are certain universities that have relationship with China that are very skittish about getting involved in advocacy, public advocacy work that is critical of China, for example. And that's something they have to work with, we have to be aware of, and find the other avenues in which to have those conversations.
Thank you. Salvador Herencia, si gusta prender su micrófono, adelante.
Yeah, I will speak in English just in this opportunity. Thanks to all of our colleagues for their interventions. I was just trying to think about, when reality or the situations or threats against academic freedom go beyond, how to say, the efforts that we have been discussing. Like, for example, we've heard Elton's testimony that he hasn't been allowed to graduate 2 times, right, because of the political strife in his country, which was today denounced by the Nicaraguan ambassador to the OAS in a very moving and important speech, denouncing the totalitarian regime that the Ortega government has stated in his country, we had Professor Carlos Heredia from CIDE, and also Professor Andrews here, that pretty much their home university is at the risk of being completely changed and the role that it has played in Mexican context. So how do you see the coalition as we try to also broaden the scope and broaden its membership, to try to provide some sort of assistance? We cannot address every single case, but how do you see the role that we could play in this in these efforts? So that would be my question. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Was that for, you cut out for a second, Salvador. Was that for me or for the group?
For whoever wants to address the issue. So I do not discriminate. So
I actually would turn that back to the people that are most under fire. I would love to hear what, for example, Kath has to say, or Elton, or Ricardo, or anyone who's spoken earlier. How do the types of advocacy that we've discussed today feel in terms of their effectiveness to you? I think it's very important that level of engagement happen in this conversation.
Kath or Elton want to speak about that?
Elton tiene levantada la mano. No sé si su intervención va a ser la misma.
Era para una pregunta posterior.
Ah, ok, ya, me confundí. Pues yo diría que este tipo de espacio es muy útil por muchas razones, pero la primera es porque pues, es para que no nos sentamos tan solos en la batalla, ¿no? Porque nosotros llevamos casi 5 meses en mi institución en una batalla frontal con las autoridades. Y las autoridades pues, nos ningunean a cada rato, ¿no? Y nos calumnian a cada rato. Y en los medios sociales y también pues los seguidores del régimen pues también nos calumnian. Entonces uno se siente abrumado. Entonces, en primer momento es el establecer lazos, es ser acompañado. Pero por otro lado, la única cosa que podemos hacer para que eso no siga pasando, pues es unirnos las voces y unirnos las fuerzas. Entonces, pues yo, en nombre de mis colegas acá en el CIDE, pues les quiero agradecer por ese espacio y por todo el trabajo que ustedes hacen. Y pues nosotros vamos a seguirle. Y estamos interesados en precisamente establecer como una red, un grupo de personas que esté dispuesta, ¿no? A levantar la voz y arriesgar, porque le quiero felicitar a Elton por estar aquí, por ejemplo, porque se está poniendo en riesgo, ¿no? Y traer la atención no siempre es bueno. Entonces, pues, es un buen espacio. Les agradecemos muchísimo todo lo que hacen y pues estamos muy interesados en seguirle con esta conversación y en estos espacios, precisamente porque necesitamos hacer una voz común para que luego, cuando vengan las acciones individuales contra las personas, tenemos mecanismos y tenemos grupos con quien podemos trabajar para pues, levantar la voz y defender a aquellas personas y esperar, ¿no? Que en un momento dado estemos en un mejor momento. Gracias.
Gracias. Elton, si quieres participar con tu pregunta o comentario, adelante.
Muchas gracias. Agradezco mucho las palabras de Salvador igual y de todos quienes han precedido la palabra. De verdad que yo me siento muy honrado de poder estar en este espacio con ustedes. y me encantó lo que se dijo previamente, ¿no? Este espacio sirve para darnos cuenta que no estamos solos. Me motiva esta palabra que se menciona o esta frase que se acaba de decir, porque realmente en la lucha, ¿no?, que hemos emprendido muchos activistas y defensores de derechos estudiantiles, por lo menos hablo de la experiencia en Nicaragua, muchas veces parece que sí estamos solos. Llegamos a sentir que lamentablemente sí estamos solos en esta batalla, en la que por lo menos en mi país no se ha consolidado todavía como una prioridad, como un tema para abordarlo de emergencia. Pasan tantas cosas cuando uno vive en medio de una dictadura que muchas veces las cosas que están relacionadas con la educación o que no están directamente relacionadas con muertes y con encarcelamientos pasan poco desapercibidas, y esto ha pasado en Nicaragua. A tal punto de que el régimen ha tenido la fuerza para confiscar universidades y para afectar a estudiantes y académicos y académicas desde el año 2018 hasta la fecha, y no se ha detenido. Lo que quiero aportar en este caso es, en este tema de no estar solo, creo que algunos hacemos una labor enfocada en ese sentido, pero cómo pudiéramos en conjunto y desde las diferentes instancias que estamos representadas aquí el día de hoy, tomar en cuenta el fortalecimiento de quienes realizamos este tipo de luchas desde el punto de vista de las herramientas. Por ejemplo, yo la semana pasada tuve 4 días en unas presentaciones informando, tratando de explicar algunas cosas a estudiantes nicaragüenses sobre autonomía académica, sobre autonomía universitaria, libertad académica, derechos estudiantiles de estudiantes, vale la redundancia, ¿verdad?, derechos humanos de estudiantes, y lo hago con mucho gusto, pero ¿cómo abrimos estos espacios para que sean más amplios, para garantizarnos a personas como yo o a estudiantes y académicos que están dispuestos a incursionar en este tema de la defensa de los derechos a la libertad académica, a la autonomía universitaria, una formación específica que nos permita transmitir de forma más adecuada los conocimientos, de forma más académica incluso, el cómo se defiende el derecho a la libertad académica, cómo se defiende la autonomía universitaria, y que no parta simplemente de experiencias y de palabras, ¿no? Sé que muchos de los que están acá están representando incluso universidades o entidades académicas, entonces más que todo dejar esa idea, esa iniciativa. Algo en lo que estoy trabajando actualmente es precisamente en crear un programa de formación para líderes activistas estudiantiles, para que cuenten con las herramientas legales y con las herramientas del conocimiento en autonomía universitaria, en libertad académica, en derechos humanos de jóvenes y estudiantes, para que cuando hagan el activismo, para que cuando se presenten en espacios de incidencia, para cuando estén tratando de involucrar a más personas en este proceso, tengan todo el conocimiento necesario, toda la formación que hace falta, y pasar del activismo también a una fuerza con mayores conocimientos. Entonces, también eso, ¿no? De qué manera quizás quienes ya han tenido experiencia en este tema han conseguido crear estos grupos de formación y brindándole herramientas a estudiantes que hemos visto en este caso. Como dicen, muchos estudiantes e incluso académicos como ustedes nos encontramos en riesgo constantemente, ¿no? Tal mi caso, que actualmente estoy en el exilio, no les había comentado, tengo un mes de estar fuera de mi país, porque tras el cierre de la universidad donde yo estaba trabajando y coordinaba un programa de beca, el mismo gobierno de Nicaragua emitió una orden de investigación en mi contra, y eso es equivalente a caer preso casi que de hecho. Entonces, más que todo eso, era un comentario al mismo tiempo como dejarles la idea, ¿no?, de cómo podemos respaldar estas iniciativas. Por mi cuenta, yo de mi activismo con el grupo pequeño de personas que trabajo, ya estamos tratando de impulsar esta iniciativa, de crear un programa de formación, de intercambio, que permita a los liderazgos académicos y estudiantiles formarse bien en el conocimiento completo de los derechos humanos, de la libertad académica y la autonomía universitaria, para ejercer con mayor fuerza y con mejores herramientas el activismo, impulsar los cambios que hacen falta en nuestros países. En mi caso, pues principalmente en Nicaragua, que estamos súper mal. La libertad académica, la educación en general a todos sus niveles, desde primaria, secundaria y universidad, está cooptada completamente por una ideología partidaria en la que ya ni siquiera se puede luchar con libertad por estos derechos esenciales. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Elton. So I'm going to pass the, Jesse, would you want some final remarks?
I'm sorry, final remarks, is that? Okay, I think that's what you said, Rafael. And yes, I will wrap up. So I mean, that actually, Elton, that was a really good lead into sort of the last point that I wanted to make before we wrap, which is that, you know, we're all here kind of because we all know the same thing, right? We all understand that there is really a crisis of attacks on higher education, and this is not, these are not, you know, run-of-the-mill human rights violations. They're tied together by a common motivation to silence the space. That's what we know. That knowledge, I think, brings us all here. I don't think enough people know that. I don't think even human rights practitioners necessarily know it well enough. I don't think people on enough campuses are aware of it. I think it harkens back to Ricardo's point about the fact that in the last several years, A La Abierta has measured attacks on students and professors and found that they are happening in similar numbers to attacks on other persecuted groups like journalists. We're all aware of those facts. The purpose, I think, fundamentally of today and of this coalition is to make our colleagues understand that, build this conversation onto campus so that the knowledge that we have and the rights and principles and ideals that underlie that knowledge become a part of our lived realities as practitioners, as students, as scholars, as members of society. That's what I'm going to come away thinking about. We will be in touch. We promise. We are excited to be in touch. Thank you all for this really illuminating, interesting conversation. And until next time, I hope you're all well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.